about having a difference between the shell and the content.
Yes.
I challenge that, but that totally depends on how your server is set up. Now, what I kind of like, there's something Glenn's been working on, Glenn Jones, who's involved with IndieWeb and Brighton, is how can we, for personal sites, get all this benefit from service workers without having to re-architecture how our sites run? Because most of them are running on CMSs where it's like, yeah, there's a templating thing, but it happens on a server, right? Grab this content, put it into this page, and you send the whole page down the pipe.
But is it always kind of the same CSS, the same kind of global.js JavaScript file?
Oh yeah, those files, sure, but that's when you're.
That's kind of the shell is the thing, like the payload that is always the same. Okay. HTML templating, I agree.
Okay, so I think it's just the word shell is what's confusing. So.
People, when we talk about shell, usually they talk about the menu and
yes.
the sidebar
oh God.
and all of that.
Well, I mean...
And I wanted to challenge that as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
Conceivably, you could even kind of have a two-level architecture there where you're actually sending that with every HTML request, right? You're sending it with the HTML, but you're also kind of having it JavaScript templated. So for people who have HTTPS, have service workers, and a running JavaScript engine, they still get that rendered faster. Conceivably, I think that takes it to a level that's in these 20% where you're running a web app.
Can I put the same shell and we just say static assets?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. In that case, I think what you've described, like I said, 80% is like, I can think of a website that wouldn't benefit from caching the static assets, because we try and do that anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would actually be my question. I mean, with the cache control header, you can cache it on the client without doing the service. I don't know, but
no, that's a great question. That brings us hang on, all the stuff with cache, we already have cache, right? True. There's a browser cache, and that's what we're normally dealing with when we say on the server, long expires headers on JavaScript and CSS, images, that kind of stuff. The way the static cache, the browser cache works is you hope that these things will happen, but there's no guarantee, right? So the user can flush it, or the browser itself can decide, actually, I need to clear out room, blah, blah, blah. With the cache API, you make your own cache. As in you can make 5 different caches. One for static assets, one for dynamic assets. And it tends, it could still get destroyed, it could still get wiped out. The last word always goes to the user, which is good. But it's more reliable and more persistent, and you have much more control about what's in there. But actually, it brings up a really good point I want to point out, is that in the situation where you say, oh yeah, look in my cache first, and if it's not there, go to the network, that's a little misleading, because actually what would happen here is you check the cache first, and then do what you would normally do. And what you would normally do would be maybe look in the browser cache first, and this can lead to some real hair pulling. It's like, I told you to go to the network, why are you bringing back this cache thing? It's not looking in your cache, it's gone. So yeah, when you say go to the network, what you're actually saying is do what you would do anyway. So actually, all the stuff you do normally to do with expires headers for, images, JavaScript, you want to do that anyway. And however you would cache bust things, query strings or whatever, you still need to do that. And Service Worker does not take away the requirement to do that. I think that's something that I got completely wrong. I thought it was automatically going to get it from the server, but no. My server said that's good for another 3 years. Then it's going to grab it from the cache.
Ultimately, it's not just the caching problem. It's maybe not on a personal set, but it's a versioning problem, right? If you have a static asset and then you start serving this HTML, that the static asset maybe the JavaScript maybe makes some assumptions about, etc. Yeah. So you always ideally want the name of that static asset to include some signature or whatever, so that it's essentially immutable. You put it out there. You need a new version, you just put another file because storage is cheap. And then you don't even need to re-implement caching in your service worker.
Yeah. Well, so basically, whatever you would have done anyway for that problem, Service Worker doesn't take that problem away.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Service Worker doesn't give you a get out of jail free card with versioning.
But in the end, doing both means the browser would cache the image or CSS file 2 times. One time for the service worker and one time with the normal cache. Possibly.
Yeah,
If
good
you write the
question.
service worker that way to cache your own, yeah, that's why I think it's best to stay away because you'd be putting the cache in front of the browser cache, right?
Yeah.
But as you said, stores is cheap, but
Yeah.
okay.
There is a slight difference with the browser cache. Now, it still goes to the server to check the expires headers and stuff like that. And if you put it in your cache, you can tell it just goes straight to the cache. So in a literal offline situation, you're saying go straight to that cache. So I agree. So 80%, I think, personal site or not, I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't want to this is for performance reasons.
But also for the next step, if you want to show a proper, say, even just an offline page,
Yeah.
you're still needing your static assets ready so that
Yeah.
that offline page is styled, right?
Exactly.
So it still kind of is that.
Yeah.
first
So
step.
this step is kind of required before you get to that.
Right.
So at a very basic, I mean, you could, if you've got your site on HTTPS by tomorrow, this is pretty straightforward to set up, I would say. In that you just got to give it a list of, as long as you think about the cache busting and versioning, fairly straightforward to set up. Oh, you're offline.
Is there, I don't know, well-known, established, and kind of maintained boilerplates for that?
There's two things. There's code maintained by Google called SW Toolbox.
And SW prefetch, is it that thing?
Like the toolbox, inside the toolbox is everything, like all these different recipes. And then Jake Archibald has on his website, if you just Google offline cookbook, different recipes. And Mozilla maintain service workers, as in the TLDs, which is the same thing. It's like recipes, and I think they grade it by difficulty. So this would be like, green, like you can get this up and running fairly quick, and then as it gets more complex, they start to go into the red, and like you need to know what you're doing here. And I think the examples use the code from SW Toolbox, I think.
You can just think that who's done all the hard work already and use that as your starting point.
This is another nice thing, is that as with all the best stuff on the web, you can view source. And so you see a website doing something nice, and you see that they have to link to their service worker. You can literally put it up and view it and pull it apart and see what they've done. Which is tricky. And on personal sites, people often document what they've done and say, here's what I did. Ethan Marcotte recently did one on his site. Went one level more than this, which I think is an interesting one to do, which is that the offline message could include, okay, you're offline, here's what we've cached, or you've cached, that you can read. So that feels like next level.
Offline index.
Offline index, yeah. Now I've got something like this working on my site. Not entirely happy with it. I think I like what Ethan's doing better. So on my site, see, first time visitor gets absolutely no benefit from service worker. So nothing we can do about that. Service worker gets installed, a bunch of static assets get cached, including an offline page, fine. I also cache some pages were basically to show in the offline. So the home page gets cached, /journal, which is my blog, so not the blog posts, but like the /links, /what. So kind of the index pages, they're cached. Now, my recipe is go to the network for those things and only show the cached version if we're offline. And then at the point that you try and go to a URL that isn't cached, so a specific post or something, at that point you see the offline message saying, sorry, you're offline, but here's a snapshot of /journal, blah, blah. So mine is kind of, just a little whitelist of pages.
How do you handle Li-Fi?
Great question. I think Li-Fi is a next level one.
Because the interesting thing is what you could also do is just go to the cache and well,
You can do a
here's the
race.
idea. Could you have yes, or could you? Is there already like UI patterns of how to handle these things, like a bar on top that says this is served from cache. We're currently trying to get to the server and kind of see.
Yeah, I think the UI questions really come up. Yeah. So Li-Fi, if you haven't heard the term, is what it sounds like. So offline is actually pretty easy. It's like you're not connected to the network, fine. Like here's a message or here's an index of stuff we've cached. Crappy connection is worse.
Or hotel connection.
Hotel connection.
Well, that's a synonym.
Yeah, Li-Fi.
Maybe the network is faster and everything, but they hijack DNS or something else.
Oh God, yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can't get to your site, even though the network will be perfectly fast.
Another reason why HTTPS is super important for this. No, I agree. Li-Fi, and so my current recipe is doing nothing with Li-Fi. And I think you're right. It gets more challenging because first thing is how do you measure? How do you know on the client side that there's? So I don't know if you ever looked at there was an API for this stuff.
For bandwidth, network bandwidth.
Yeah, but
That never turns off, right?
No, because I mean you could the API would return values like maybe, probably, like
it literally was what you were thinking just in JavaScript code. It's like you're like it's probably not working. What does the bandwidth API say? And it says it's probably not working.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And actually, it's fair enough because it turns out you can't say with any certainty because it can change from second to second or less. So to say like, oh, this is definitely a bad connection. What you can get back is the type of connection, but again, that tells you nothing. Like whether it's Ethernet or
no,
Wi-Fi.
wasn't there a flag that said it was a paid or a flat rate connection? Was that because that one was kind of interesting to be like nice to users?
That was interesting. There are a lot of security implications there.
Oh, God.
Of fingerprinting.
So I've never looked. I just seen that they were thinking about that.
Yeah. And the other this whole idea of client hints, where it's like.
Am I roaming? Because if I'm roaming, I'm glad that you're not sending me your retina picture.
But even in that, see, this is what Jake brought up is like, not always. Like, let's say he's traveling, he's roaming, and someone sends him a link on Twitter to an amusing cat video. Yeah, show me the lo-fi, but I don't need to see that in 4K HD. But even if he's roaming and someone sends him like, hey, the new Star Wars teaser trailer is out, I'm willing to sit in my hotel room for 3 hours until that baby is downloaded. So ultimately, it's the user's decision.
Right.
And that's what I think brings up the UI patterns is like, and because this came up with responsive images as well. It's like we're trying to infer what the user wants by screen size or bandwidth or whatever, and actually maybe giving the user a button to press that says, "Give me hi-fi." Is the way to go. But I think even then you need to have principles like begin with the lowest quality and offer the highest rather than the other way around, obviously, I guess.
So it would be something like a bar on top saying you're offline, this is the cached version, and maybe on the side a spinner saying we are still trying to get the website from you in the background, but you can look at the cache. Yeah,
because it's not offline, right? It's more like here's a snapshot. We're working on it.
Right. And then
Stay tuned.
Then how do you switch?
Right, because if I'm halfway through reading
a
page of text.
Oh yeah.
And it switches around.
So that's you end up basically giving like a button that says like, oh, we've got something. Would you like to switch? And then by that time, people are 50% down and they're not seeing it anyway. And then by that time, you're wondering why have I written that bar?
Yeah.
And it's just I'm interested in like patterns that have proven themselves working.
So I mean, one Jake talked about was literally this race thing where you can say instead of saying try one then the other, you can actually kick off a request of both, and see which comes back first. Because weirdly, on super fast connections, you might actually get a network response faster than the cache response. In some, it is theoretically possible, but it doesn't get away from the question of what you then do. Okay, I've got one. I'm still trying for the other in the background, or so how do you indicate that there could? Because you don't want to just update it unless we go to loading spinners.
Even if it's not loading spinners, right? On super fast network, you can get a response back in an absurdly low amount of time. So if you make that race, like you put, hey, give me the cache but you essentially put a sleep 50 milliseconds or something else in, you might be delaying the response to the user by an amount they won't perceive at all, but that race now becomes a bit more controllable. So you say, instead of rendering this at 7 milliseconds because my network is crazy fast, you'll get it back in 50 milliseconds. The user won't notice that delay because it's typically lower than 200 or whatever, right? So, I mean, I think for me the big part is that it gives you all this control, and then you can tweak, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to depend on the network. You can mess with that value and see what's fast enough, what's acceptable for me to be able to provide a better option.
Here's another thing to bring us, like, it depends on the content. So,
yeah, I think it's kind of maybe reiterating something that we've been talking about for a while, but progressive enhancement, I think, is the best way to deal with Li-Fi. If you serve HTML, that's good, and then you enhance it with CSS, and then you add behavior with JavaScript, right? When you get that HTML page, you're gonna be able to read that blog post just fine.
yeah.
And it's typically a lot smaller than CSS and JavaScript files these days anyway.
So here's another way to say, okay, for something like a blog post, it can get updated, but how often is that likely is one question. And then what would the nature of the updates be? Would they be crucial, or is it one I fixed a typo, right? Or I added a little update, an extra paragraph based on feedback. And in that situation, a recipe you could do is always go to the cache. Like if the post is in the cache, grab it and show it. And then grab the version from the network, but don't swap it out. Just put that updated version in the cache. So then what people get is stale by 1. So when you're reading the post, you're seeing it not as it is, but how it was, it's out of date, basically. And for some content, that would be completely inappropriate, because being up to date really matters. Time-based content, stuff like that. For some, on my side, I would say most of my blog posts, I'd be fine with that, because it is probably typos or little extra paragraph.
If you want to get fancy, what you can do is fetch that response and then see if the diff is small enough. And then it would be when you have typos, right?
Okay.
Typos, the diff is going to be 1 line or like 7 characters, and then you just update it in place.
So this is where we get to next level. And this is exactly what Glenn's been working on. And the reason why I find it really interesting is that, so when we talk about stuff like the app shell model, blah, 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 it does involve your server architecture being done a certain way, right? That you've got the separation between content and shell, blah, blah, blah. What we're working is like, it shouldn't matter what you're doing on the server. This is unrelated. How do we get I don't know what to call this, but service worker side rendering, effectively, right? Where it's like, that bit doesn't need to change, that bit doesn't need to change, that bit I've gotten back from the network has been updated. Yeah, the diffing. So,
I mean, it's kind of like all those form submission plugins back in the day, right? The best ones didn't make you do anything special on the server. You could submit it via
you just drop it in.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to do a bad job of explaining the way Glenn is approaching this, but it kind of blew my mind.
What I think, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to, so what he's doing is he's abusing the cache. Because not only does he grab like HTML stuff, he generates a URL that doesn't exist, and in that he stores a JSON representation of effectively, so the key value pairs are selectors, CSS selectors, and of bits of the page that will change and bits of the page that won't. So as you travel from URL to URL, it grabs the corresponding JSON file, which doesn't actually exist anywhere other than your cache, which is not how you're supposed to use cache, and checks which bits do I need to look at using the selectors, and then update those bits. Now here's the bit that I thought that's not possible, because to use selectors to look at a document, you can't do that from a service worker. It's like a web worker. There is no DOM, right? The cache API, I didn't realize this, is not just accessible through service worker. You can access the cache API straight from the browser, from a regular JavaScript script, which means you can do your diffing and you can update the DOM and you can do all this stuff. Now maybe you you need to communicate, like payload incoming, payload arrive, that we can do with, was it post messaging? Post messaging. But then anything involving diffing and DOMs and updates, don't do it in the service worker. Do it in this other script. You can still get to the cache. I did not realize that. I just assumed the cache API was something specifically for service workers, and it's not.
This builds on something. So I worked a lot with Rails, and in Rails, a few years ago now, it was in vogue to send back JSON documents from the server that contain blobs of rendered HTML. And then the JavaScript in the browser would literally take those selectors and the value from the JSON blob that you got from the server, update that in the page. And that was how they reinvented this Ajax updating thing. And this seems kind of like putting this in the cache so that you just take it.
So there's a project called Turbo.
Oh.
That's that idea though, right? That you
TurboLinks is just on any link, but that takes the content from the server as it is.
right.
And
So you're still getting the full.
so you're getting the requests as they are.
Okay.
But that has its whole host of problems that they're not abandoning.
Okay. But that I think is the next level part. It requires suddenly you're doing all sorts of stuff. There's post messaging, there's cache, there's also, but what I like to do, obviously it's the benefit to the user, is that you get instant loads. You get to, so as someone's on your site and they click a URL, they go to something really quick, at least the bits that don't require changing, and then maybe there's a network request for the stuff that you need to update. But the experience is really good, and it doesn't matter what you've built your site in. If you've used a static site generator, you've got a database-driven CMS, doesn't matter. It's completely separate. So it's great. But I do feel like that's advanced. I'm guessing there's more stuff in these levels, more like easier, simpler things to do.
I think one in the next level that we put is controlling non-GET requests.
Ooh, I haven't even touched that.
Because I think that would be interesting if you post notes to your site, right? If you want to post 7 notes when you're offline, and then when you come online, they get posted.
Actually, I mean, I would put background sync.
Well,
or you mean when you're next back on the?
When you come back online, and I think the reason that's interesting is JavaScript frameworks will do this now, where they will take your AJAX requests and put them in a queue and process it, right? But
QQ, let's call it Q.
I think it will be good to be able to just use regular HTML forms and have regular requests the way the browser would make them, so you don't have to architect your server a certain way to accept AJAX form submissions, etc. Right?
Right. So I'm offline and I'm on a page with a form, like
Yeah.
my posting interface. I fill it in, I hit submit. I intercept that with my service worker, and it's now I can't reach the network, so.
Store it in index
So the
DB.
service workers just stores there.
But where do I store it?
Index
Okay.
DB.
Index, some local storage of some kind.
Yeah.
Can I access local storage from the service worker, or do I need to?
No. I don't
Okay,
think
but so we
Index
gotta
DB
do
is accessible.
IndexedDB from the service worker.
Yeah.
It is.
Or a virtual URL.
Abuse the cache. Yeah. Okay, so store it.
And show a custom like response that says like,
Couldn't do.
looks like you're offline. We've stored your post for later upload.
Okay, so and then later when I am online,
You're no longer on that page.
I'm not on the page. That's the problem. So just visits any URL on this domain, and does it check for?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything? Yeah. So next time the service worker gets fired up for any reason whatsoever, look in IndexedDB or wherever.
Yeah.
Is there anything needs cleaning up? Okay, so that is next level. I would say the next level version of that is background sync, where you don't even need to revisit a URL. But browser support, blah blah blah, a bit tricky. There's a good post on the Twilio blog by Phil Nash describing the flow of this. It's specific to SMS in the post, but it actually works for everything, which is exactly what we just outlined. The only difference will be where at the end of R1, we have to revisit some URL to trigger the post, use the background sync to do it whenever there's a connection.
Could you
don't
do
even have to open the browser.
Could you do something like if the server knows you've been in the process of writing a post or something like that, and then it stops having connection to you, then later on try reaching you via a notification to wake up a service worker in the background, and the service worker then fires up
Yes.
Yeah.
the syncing process?
You can use a web push API to basically start up the service worker, and then it can basically do anything like syncing with the server.
And then you don't have to go on the URL again to...
Yeah.
Exactly. Like in the
Is
how it
there
happens in the
a
background.
shared worker for that? Do you know about this API?
I'm aware of like the web workers and shares, but I haven't.
I think shared worker is service worker, but for any page on this domain. Even if you have multiple tabs, then you have one instance of shared worker.
Okay.
I'm not very familiar with it, but it seems to be very unknown-ish. So
Looks like you need something like that. The multiple tab situation could really screw with the non-get request stuff, right?
So and if you have like one instance of shared worker, then controls all of these submissions, and they happen in the order in which you want. And you don't have to worry about going to this page and checking.
So these are all the kind of problems that the hoodie people are trying to solve, right? Like all the they've been doing offline first since before there were service workers, and effectively a toolbox of all this kind of stuff, queuing and background sync, so that you don't have to, because it's a nightmare. Is the takeaway I was getting from it. It's like it's messy stuff, like I said, multiple tabs, things out of order. It could get really, really messy. I think there's something more in the offline index. So here's one I'm doing on my site. Like I said, I'm doing the stale thing potentially, in that I have separate caches. I've got one for my static assets. I've got one for images. And I got a separate one for pages, HTML pages. The reason I'm keeping them separate is I don't want to fill up the user's cache with 100 images or 100 pages. So I keep like I think 20 images, 30 pages as you browse around my site. Separate from any ones that I consider to be interface images, logo, stuff like that. And so that in the offline situation, there's a good chance you might see a recent post you visited is cached in your file. So I have to have a cleanup thing, which again involves the messaging back and forth to say clear out. It's newer ones that get added to the cache, older ones get pulled out. That's the way it works. And so what I can theoretically do in the offline message is I can show the offline index. I know that these index pages are cache / journal, whatever. I could also say, and looking in the cache, I see, these pages are available for you. However, all I can show is literally the URLs, as in / blah 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 / blah blah blah. What I haven't stored is what's the title of the page, or a description, or anything like that. So I think that's an interesting, again, from a UI perspective. I think I need more than the cache there. I probably have to use a local. You said IndexedDB straight away. Is IndexedDB now the preferred?
Yeah.
Okay. So local storage is in
Local storage, because it's not async. It's
it blocks.
blocks.
Okay. In this case, maybe that would be all right. But okay, IndexedDB is preferred. So what I should actually be doing, I still need to store the contents of the page in the cache, but each time I do that, I could be storing that URL as a key, and either a chunk of HTML or
Title.
an array or stuff.
Well, what we end up doing loads of times is we end up giving every page has teaser information, right? It has kind of an abstract, the title and a picture.
Stuff you put in a Twitter card.
Right,
Yeah.
that ends up going to Open Graph and Meta headers and everything, and you could just pull these. Which means you could also pull these images, actually. Which means you could also then have like a little preview picture for each entry.
I would have to literally parse every page though. Like let's say I say, you've got these 10 pages ready to look at. I'd have to
Well, you could, yes, you'd have to parse them, but you could also do stuff like whenever someone hits that page, you still have the browser, you still have the DOM, you could then feed IndexedDB.
Right.
with
So I
that.
think
And then because since you're already not working in the service worker cache, you're free to not do that in the service worker
Yeah.
script.
I think it's what Ethan was, something similar to what Ethan was doing on site, but I don't think he was using IndexedDB or even, so I'm not sure how he was assembling the descriptions. But I think from a UI perspective, it'd be nice to say.
What you actually could do is you could actually pass the whole page in the DOM and have a full text search index in the IndexedDB, so you could speed up your search, right?
Okay.
Which would only
Now we're abusing IndexedDB, right? That's what the cache was meant to be for. But I suppose, yeah.
I think here's where it gets interesting to think about the existing HTTP caching techniques as well. Because I don't have service worker, and in airplane mode, pages that I visited before are loaded just fine in the browser. So even if you're offline and you don't cache all of this data about your pages here, right? And you say connect through it, the browser will give you a 200 response with the page that has been cached, and you can parse that and generate your offline page without making any additional order requests, and even when you're offline. If your server serves them with the appropriate last modified at, or
Yeah, so you don't even show offline messages.
or e-tags, yeah. I mean, it's best effort, and I think that's what we're talking about here. But
Well, since you assume that you're offline, and you assume that the cache response would be pretty quick, you could even, when you render the index, have it ping the cache and see if something's there, and then kind of show it, and not show it if there's nothing in the cache. Because you, by the time you're on the offline page, you assume that you're offline and that these kinds of responses will come in like 2 milliseconds or something.
yeah, I mean, this comes in pretty quick,
Super
right?
fast,
So I think the fact that it's not necessarily you are going across the network, it's do what the browser would normally do, lets
Actually
you
get to
layer in that whole, I'm getting HTTP responses. The browser actually has a lot of smarts about how to handle those, especially if they have, e-tags or last modified apps, etc., which I think is very useful for a personal site. It gets messy if you do this caching on top of the browser.
Yeah, you're trying to reinvent what the
for an
browser
app. Yeah,
does,
then
yeah.
you're just reinventing caching on your own. But here, you can just play them off for simple content, especially.
We have time. Oh, we're going to have to wrap it up. I was hoping we could see some examples of personal sites doing it. But I think, do we have time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes is very quick, just because this has been a bit theoretical, and it'd be just nice to see
Take my seat.
one or two. Oh yeah. I think, and then what I'll do is I'll go on Wi-Fi and get off Wi-Fi. Do you wanna, Okay, so in Chrome, which does support service workers, let me just see.
Oh, yeah.
Ethan was doing one.
What's the latest on,
Tom's-
what's the latest on iOS 11 or mobile Safari 11? Is it still just like we're considering it?
They haven't officially even said that. It's one
Haven't they?
person.
I
No,
think on their blog it says under consideration.
a personal opinion
Oh
by
god.
someone on WebKit was, people seem to want this, we should probably do it.
Okay.
There is no official comment on any Apple products on what's in the pipeline.
So nothing new about that.
They won't even tell us about the input type date. Come on.
Yeah, that's
Right. Well, 5th of June, right? Or 12th of June.
Yeah.
The next big chance for us getting
I
service
think it's
workers
going to
out.
be when the next version of Safari comes. It's either going to be there or
Oh,
we'll
I
never
thought
know.
that. I thought that the last time, but the thing is, it's at WWDC, which is like at the 5th of June, so it's not far.
Do you think they might say something there?
Well, then, yeah, no, absolutely. Like what Safari does is pretty clear by the end of WWDC.
All right.
Because you get a beta, right? You can kind
Oh,
of,
I see,
you
yeah.
get you
Developer preview.
right.
Usually you get some idea from looking at the WebKit repository.
Yeah,
There's nothing happening.
Right now,
Looking at tea
nothing.
leaves.
yeah. God.
All right, so I've got a couple of personal sites up. See, okay, interesting. So we saw the difference there between what was up when it was fresh,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the. So this is what when you were demoing in there. This was the version we were seeing. Since then, there's been fresh content, which we saw when we were online. So this is like the stale version. This is like that N-1 pattern, one stale. And if I'm online and visit, I get it fresh. And now when I go offline, am I right in thinking this, Callum? I get, is the fresh version now?
It takes a while. Yeah.
Maybe I need to visit once or twice.
Yeah. Could be just the general cache. So.
Yeah, okay. Let me look around. Oh, okay. So you got the custom one. Oh, and you've got the snapshot thing going on. Yeah, which we saw. Yeah. So if you're on the homepage, don't even show anything. Say you're offline. Just show what you got. This is Tom's loaded up, but now I've gone offline. Okay, so again, a staler version. We've got.
No images.
Well, those were embeds, right? Those iframes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why an iframe is like a portal into another domain. So, but this image is cached. I'm seeing it just fine. And I'm going to go to. Okay.
There's my offline. And then if you scroll down, there's another one where I try to check if I have the images in cache or not. So the gray one is the fallback image.
Yeah, the default.
For image tag.
So you're letting people know.
Is this placeholder IT?
No, actually the gray one is an SVG.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which it doesn't even live at a URL. It's like literally
Data URI.
a data. It's
Nice.
It's like just output this SVG because it's small enough.
Super nice.
So here's Ethan's. I'm on his home page. I've gone offline. And this is just, again, it's just, well, why don't you just read it then? It's fine.
And individual articles then?
I must have visited this because this is all working just fine. Let me try and find one that, okay, we've actually got different link colors so we can test. So if it's one I've visited, I just get it. So this one apparently I haven't. Okay. So he is giving this, but he has
Cool.
shown,
That's nice.
right? So this I think is the next layer, is the offline index, not just of what you know is in the cache because you put it there, but what the user. This is specific to me, and if you visit it, you get a different offline index, and if you visit, because it totally depends.
But here's like, wouldn't it isn't that creepy to some extent? And I see that it's not as creepy as, I don't know, getting diaper ads before you know your wife's pregnant, but which happened. But isn't that creepy to some extent? Like Ethan Marcotte is now telling you he knows where you went, and
But he doesn't.
He doesn't.
It's in the browser history.
well, no, but to a user,
Oh.
to a user, isn't that Ethan telling him like, oh, but you've been here before, and I've seen that you've gone through this and
Well,
this.
interestingly, that issue was brought up already when we were just looking at here, because :visited
Link colors.
already gives that away. And there was a huge security hole with :visited.
Yes.
Do you remember this? Where, okay, so :visited allows you to say style links you visited one way and style links have great. So what I'll do is I will have a bunch of links to banking sites. I'll put them off screen somewhere. Style them to be :visited pink. Then use get computed style to see, is it pink? Now I know you visited this banking site. I'm going to make my UI look like that banking site's UI, fish you, blah, blah, blah. Turns out there was a security hole in CSS through this. For that reason, effectively, you can keep track in the browser of who's visited what.
But it'd probably be just like marketing does when they send you diaper ads, but they also send you an ad for, I don't know, bread, and so that it kind of looks random, right? Shouldn't you maybe in a blog kind of scenario just maybe go and fetch the first 10 articles and kind of spice the
So
users?
everyone gets the same experience.
Well, no, but everyone has at least a few random entries there, because that may or may not, but this is very personal, this one guy, that's okay, but maybe for larger companies, it may look super creepy if, I don't know, this megacorp tells you, but you've been on these pages and these pages are still accessible to you.
You could have the best ofs. Google like, okay, you're offline, but you know.
Yeah, you should maybe tune this UI in some cases where it just feels creepy.
And that's it. I had not considered a creepiness factor in this at all. It's interesting. And I would say I'm normally fairly sensitive to that stuff. And I hadn't.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you'd even have to kind of order pages by when they were added to the cache. That's how the cache gives them back to you, right?
Yeah.
So it even kind of looks like a browser history, and these things, they just feel creepy. Sorry, they just feel super.
You want to see a creepy use of service workers? I'll show you a creepy.
I think the assumption for me is when I go to the site, I want to read his things, whereas ads, I don't have any desire to see them, and they're forced upon me.
Yeah.
I think that's
they're definitely
the
a
difference
lot more creepy. That I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so first of all, this is a little presumptuous of me in that, so I put a book online, and you visit one page, and like literally everything is cached. I have put everything into a cache. Images, content, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, that's pretty presumptuous. I mean, if you were on a...
But not creepy.
Okay, well, I'm getting to creepy. But it's presumptuous because if you're on a roaming thing and I've just put a whole book, you visited the homepage and I've just put a whole book in your cache. Didn't ask you if you were okay with that. It's presumptuous, but you're right, it's not creepy. Here's what's creepy.
Uh-oh.
On Adactio.com, suppose you never visit resilientwebdesign.com, but you visit Adactio.com.
And you have an ad there.
Basically.
Oh, yeah, that's creepy.
Well, we were just talking about how embeds like iframes are basically important from the thing. So this is an iframe that links to a URL on Resilient Web Design.
That installs the service worker, that pulls the whole book. Sure, yeah, that is creepy.
That's super creepy.
But that basically means that service workers will be out in a year or something, right? Because everybody will use this, and
when the advertisers get hold of it, yeah.
Yeah, the browser.
Yeah. By the way, that's the whole mood. Once Apple actually like brings this up, every marketing department of every company will tell every agency, oh, and by the way, our website should work offline.
This is currently built into AMP, as in it's being encouraged. So I was at the Progressive Web App Summit, and they were showing the AMP version of like the Washington Post, blah, 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 and then how you could just fire up Washington Post, and because of service workers, it's all a PW, brilliant. But I was looking, when we were seeing the AMP version, I was like, you weren't never at Washington Post, that was like Google's caching thing. And I brought this up with people, and they're like, it's iframes, that's just how iframe works. Live with it. And their point was like, it's already a dumpster fire, basically, with iframes, as in...
Let's at least make it really warm.
It's just, as it is, anytime you put an iframe on your domain, you're saying, do what you want.
Yeah.
Total free reign to install what you want. I mean, yeah, that's the nature of it. But yeah, that's creepy.
iframes is Google making up their own standards. What could possibly go wrong?
That's creepy. It actually doesn't work on me because I've got my cookie settings to be, same domain only, and apparently that applies to things like service workers, as it turns out. Or maybe it's not. It's basically saying like only don't let a service worker get installed through anything other than visiting the domain. So an iframe doesn't work depending on your. But the default browser factory setting would totally work. That's creepy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah, with great power. I kind of did this as a demo of the creepiness.
Because probably nobody like yelled at you, right? Wow. Okay, next session.